welcome back to a new video. Today I'm going to be talking about classic literature, specifically how you can get into classics. So I did want to mention that you don't necessarily have to read classics to call yourself a bookworm or to even like reading. I'd like to say it is very rewarding, and also you can look into different historical perspectives and you can also figure out allusions from different books. So I broke this video into two different parts. First, I'll share some tips on how you can begin with classic literature, and then I'll share some of my personal recommendations. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first tip is to actually read summaries before you read a book. Or you can also read the book first and then read the summary. Regardless, basically, reading a summary helps you comprehend what's going on in the text, and I find that super helpful. It's not cheating. There are multiple websites out there where you can actually check what's happening or what's going on in the story. Next tip I actually have here is to listen to an audiobook. So audiobooks can improve your attention and focus span. You also have to just maintain your whole attention through a book. There's so many benefits to listening to an audiobook. Not everyone has the time to actually read a book, so an audiobook can be a very good alternative. It's just as good as reading a book. Some books are actually meant to be listened to because silent reading didn't truly become an activity until the late 19th century. Before that, it was considered a social activity in which friends and families would gather together, take turns reading. There are many great websites out there where you can look for an audiobook, or you can also look one at YouTube for free. Next tip I have here is to watch the movie version first. So watching the movie version is a great way to enjoy the classic. It helps you see the story, it helps you see the time period and the characters, and a good actress or actor really does make the difference for your understanding. Personally, I always tend to prefer the book version better than the movie. However, if you watch the movie first, then it might not make you as upset when you read the book and then watch the movie. I know some movies completely change the storyline, but overall I think they still have some similar plots. And overall there are also great movies that do not change the storyline of the classic. So anyways, moving on to the next tip. The next tip is to actually learn about the book's historical context. Historical context really does influence the writing and the style, and you can also understand why the writer's writing something specifically. You can come up with a better understanding of the narrative. For example, Jane Austen lived right through the French, American, and the Industrial Revolution, and also the Napoleonic Wars, and she was very much influenced by the Romantic period, which saw more successful women becoming writers. And for example, The Great Gatsby was written in the Roaring 20s, where there was a huge economic boom due to post-war in America. So overall, understanding why some classics were in that time period is super helpful, and it can be really fun and entertaining. Okay, so this next tip, I haven't heard too many people talk about it. However, you can read short stories. Short stories provide authors more freedom to experiment and also convey a theme. So you don't have to commit to a really large book. Instead, just reading a short story can give you an example of what a writer writes like. There are many great short stories out by many iconic classic authors. They're a lot more shareable, and overall I feel like the format is meant to be more concise and not as fully length as novel. So I'll include here some of my favorite short story recommendations. So my next tip is to actually annotate a book. So annotating can just help you understand the characters and understand what's under the text. It can just definitely help you understand the book better. There are many ways you can annotate, but for example, I like to get different colors for different sections. Blue can mean maybe literary allusions, or red can be like a romance scene that I really enjoyed, or green can be this beautiful quote that I love, or the scene I really enjoy. You know, whatever. It really depends on the book I'm reading, but I'd usually also highlight quotes I really enjoy. On the side, I'd have some post-its where I can write any unknown vocabulary, and then I'll just look it up and then write it down. Overall, you can use arrows, you can use tabs, you can use regular post-its. The classic book, I'd write a summary at the end of each chapter to make sure I just comprehended the text. Or I'd also write down some of my thoughts. It really shouldn't be like a chore you have to do. If you don't enjoy annotating, then don't annotate. such a great way to understand and just comprehend the classic better. A great way to comprehend and understand the classic novel better. Okay, so my first recommendation is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So I think everyone kind of knew this one was coming, but I just wanted to get started with this one because this one is one of my favorite classic novels. This is classic Gothic literature, my favorite. It's about this man who somehow keeps himself beautiful and young through a very special painting that essentially reveals his inner ugliness. It's beautifully written. It contains deep thoughts concerning our modern world, and overall this is just such a great book. When I ask people what their favorite classic is or what book got them into classics, people always bring this book up, so this is great. Overall, I really enjoy the narrative. It's also, I believe, 165 pages long, so it's not too long. So basically, just go read this book, it's awesome. So next we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is really not a story just about love. It's literally about being proud and prejudiced. Basically, Elizabeth's character, which is the main character, she misjudges Mr. Darcy and the first time she meets him because she just has a very bad impression of him at first. Overall, the story is super funny, it's witty, it's very good. The characters are all very interesting. It's just a timeless classic. Everyone should read Pride and Prejudice, honestly. But I'd also say if you don't really enjoy Pride and Prejudice, then Emma might be a great option. This one is super fun as well. It's very witty and overall very good. If you tried Pride and Prejudice and you really didn't enjoy it, then I'd say Emma is great. Okay, so next we have 1984 by George Orwell. So this is one of his best crafted novels. It contains very powerful warnings against the dangers of a totalitarian society. Again, this one is a very easy read. This one is actually the first classic book I've ever read. It's easy to get across and it just contains horrific accounts. I feel like that's the scariest part about this. Essentially, this isn't just a dystopian novel, but it happens, and it happened in our society. So it really does change the way you look at society. This is such a life-changing novel, and it just talks about the way society works. Off topic, but I think the version is very pretty. Like, look, it has some very nice drawings in it that I really enjoy, and it even has its own bookmark. Look, so yay. Anyways, so the book is super interesting, and I really did enjoy it. I think everyone, literally everyone, needs to read this book. This is such a mind-blowing and relevant book. If you don't want to read 1984, then I'd also say Animal Farm is a great book. Animal Farm is only 150 pages and it's essentially about talking animals, but don't be fooled because it is very political, it can be very controversial, it has a very interesting allegory about animals revolting against the farmers, essentially just the Russian Revolution. It's definitely a satire to imperialism, but also communism. And there are obviously other great dystopian books out there like Fahrenheit 451 and Brave New World. I actually haven't read Brave New World, but I really want to read it. So next novel I have here is The Great Gatsby. So The Great Gatsby is considered one of the best American novels of all time. It's definitely a favorite to many. It's very charming and very charismatic overall. It's a great look at life in the 1920s. It has memorable quotes, pretty short once again, and I think this is just another must-read. Honestly, all these are must-reads, but still, this one's very enjoyable. Okay, so next we have Little Woman. This book is perfect to read as a traditional Christmas read. However, there's still nothing that prevents you from reading this book because it's just so perfect. Oh, Lori, Meg, Beth, and March, Amy are all characters that stick with readers for a lifetime. So you read this book, you can finally figure out which of the March sisters you are. It's very enjoyable. This is just the perfect read. There are other great classics out there for beginners that I did not recommend. So if you want to leave your recommendations in the comments, then I'd really appreciate that. Try reading my recommendations. You just reduce the time you spend on social media and on the internet, and you'll actually read content that helps you improve and helps you grow overall. So yeah, go read a classic novel. Thank you for watching. That's it. Hope to see you in a future video. Bye!